Hello, one and all. This is WellArmedWithTacos, and welcome back to Stories from Sector 11, the Warhammer 40k podcast that is very rarely, occasionally about fantasy. I don't know how long today's story is going to go on. I don't really have much of a game to talk about. I do have a game that occurred, but today's story is mostly going to be about rules. And in case you couldn't get it from the title, the importance of remembering rules. One of the problems in Warhammer 40k, especially if you're a 40k old-timer like me that's been around since 4th edition, is the sheer volume of rules. There are game systems with a lot more rules out there, certainly. I've played Infinity. I've seen just about how bad it gets. But 40k has a lot of rules. And there's a lot to try to remember. And when you've been playing for 4 editions now, some rules tend to conflict in your memory. At least for me. I have a bad memory. I know that for certain. I'm 100% sure I have a bad memory. It screws me all the time. But it can really screw you hard in a 40k game. So, there are instances where forgetting rules can actually cost you the game. And this is one of those stories. So let's talk about the game first, and then we'll just talk about the subject of the video vaguely in general afterwards. I did get to play today. This is Sunday as I'm recording this, and I got to play today on Sunday. For those of you just joining us, I like to say the day that I got the game in, so you can see, like, from the day I got to play from the day that it was uploaded. So if you had like any questions about the game or any questions about the podcast or the video or anything like that, you would know like how fresh my memory is based off that, and you could tell how fresh my memory is just from me mentioning it. I'm recording this immediately afterwards the game pretty much, so memory is fresh on this one, and I wanted to record this one passionately because this is a very important thing I wanted to talk about today, so I'm a little enthusiastic about doing this video. I played my Grey Knights, which is immediately a mistake, but I chose to play my Grey Knights, and I played against a Tyranid player. We have 2 Tyranid players here locally. One of them is really, really bad. By bad, I mean difficult to play against, and the other one is not as bad, and today I played against the one that was really, really, really bad. If you ask me, in my personal opinion, I believe Tyranids wear the crown of being the most overpowered Xenos army. Eldar are probably close behind them somewhere, like the Harlequins and the Dark Eldar can be really, really tough, but there are certain things that the Tyranids have access to, which is just like, I don't usually have a problem playing against people when they tell me their rules. Like, if you tell me this unit has this rule and blank, 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 and I don't know it, I'll believe you. Because I don't usually play against people I couldn't trust or couldn't believe. When I play against Tyranids, more often against Tyranids than against any other army, I have to stop and say, can I see that in your rulebook? Can I see how you got to that point cost? And it's almost always right. I catch them a little bit on some things every once in a while, but that's part of remembering. It's not intentional with these players. Some other players, most certainly, but when I catch them on rules wrong here, it's not intentional. But just most of the time, it's like I'm stunned at what that codex is capable of, and it really is just completely, like, horribly off the scale balance as far as I'm concerned. The key difference between like Tyranids and Dark Eldar is Dark Eldar don't really have subpar choices. They have things that aren't necessarily great compared to other choices in their own codex, but everything the Dark Eldar have access to is great compared to something else somebody has. Dark Eldar don't have bad picks. They have picks that are worse than others, but never any bad picks. Tyranids have bad picks, to be certain. To be sure. There are things in the Tyranid Codex that aren't worth taking in any game and for any sense, but it's because the Tyranids have a vast codex. They're one of the oldest armies out there. Like Dark Eldar, I don't think were playable until 3rd or 4th, possibly even 4th edition. They don't have too many choices. They have a few, but there are codexes with more, to be certain. Harlequins hardly have any choices, but all of their choices are great. Nothing in the Harlequin Codex sucks, but it's all great and it's all expensive. But Tyranids have bad picks. But if you're playing Tyranids to win, you're not going to take those bad picks, and that's sort of the, I hesitate to call it a problem, but that is the intended play style of this one Tyranid player. He's very much about going to forums and websites to see what the best Tyranid tactics are, and then using those. He's very much like what you would kind of consider like a net lifter. He doesn't look up like tournament lists, exactly tournament lists, but he will use the units that seem to be doing really well, which is of course coincidentally the ones that are used in the tournament lists. So he won't mimic the tournament lists exactly, but he'll make something kind of close to it. And one of his favorite weapons of choice is Carnify, and today's specific Remember Your Rules story is actually about Carnify, and Carnify to me represent one of the most egregiously overpowered options in the Tyranid Codex, simply because their point cost does not match their value. For how strong Carnify are, they are vastly too cheap. You're looking at a toughness 7, 3-up armor, 8 wound, monstrous creature with an upgrade that makes it -1 to be hit from shooting attacks. It has melee weapons that are strength, I believe, 7, AP -3, flat 3 damage each on, I believe it's 6 attacks. Hitting on 4s, hitting on 3s, because he was using Old One-Eye, and Old One-Eye was nearby, giving them the ability to hit on 3s. These particularly and these Carnify also have a ranged gun. They have the Devourer systems, and these Carnify cost him 115 points. A 10-man Space Marine squad costs more than 115 points, and in no way, in any hell, in any universe, could reasonably expect to drop that Carnify before that Carnify slaughters them. It's unrealistic. It won't happen. That's the problem with Carnify. They are very, very tough for very, very cheap compared to what they're worth. If they were toughness 6, it would be a lot easier, because there is a lot of toughness, or there is a lot of strength 7 weapons out there. Strength 7 is a common strength on guns, and that would be the difference between wounding them on 3s and wounding them on 4s. Because they are strength 7, you can only wound them on 4s with strength 7 systems, and that makes a big difference. I just said that in like 10 different ways, but you get my point. Especially as Grey Knights, because Grey Knights have no traditional Space Marine heavy weapons on their infantry. The only heavy weapons we get are the incinerators, which is technically it's an assault weapon, but it's in our heavy weapon selection. The Psy Cannons and the Silencer. The Psy Cannon is the strongest of them, and it is only strength 7. As a result, it doesn't wound the Carnify on anything but 4s, making my strongest ranged weapon on my infantry wound them still on 4s. And, the big deal I can't stress enough, they have a piece of equipment that makes a -1 to be hit. So you're talking about a monstrous creature that has 8 wounds, so you have to put it down with something heavy. No single D6 weapon could do it, not even on your best roll. And it's a 3-up armor save, which means against almost anything you hit it with, it's going to have a 6-up armor save or better. Like, if you hit it with, if you just try to glance it down with shots, you're going to need 5s to wound it, unless you're poisoned, which is your Dark Eldar or nobody else, basically. And you're going to need, you need 5s to wound it, and it's got a 3-up armor save. The highest AP typically things go to is -3, which it still gets a 6-up armor save against. It's not great, but it is a roll that they get to make. It's essentially an invul. Having a 3-up armor is very close to just straight up having a weak invul in this system. There is stuff that is -4, but there's not too much of that stuff out there. So it's toughness 7, it has 8 wounds, it has a 3-up armor, and on top of all that, it gets the -1 to hit. They're just ridiculous. Couple of other examples of Tyranid things that are just completely off the wall. Biovores pack probably the highest potential to deal mortal wounds in a number than any other unit in the game. believe 50 points each is what a Biowar costs. So 150 points for 3 that will reliably do 3 or 2 mortal wounds per turn, and that's just 3 of them. You can bring 9 of them and do potentially 9 mortal wounds. I think 9 would become the new average per turn. 9 mortal wounds a turn from just the Biowars, which is more than I've never seen anybody else get more than 9 mortal wounds in a turn. So it's crazy what they're capable of with that. Tyranids have an army-wide -1 to be hit. As I said, like the Carnivai have a piece of equipment for it. Tyranids have access to units that create a cloud that says if the unit is within 3 inches of the thing generating the cloud, which are of course characters, so they can't be singled out, the unit becomes -1 to be hit. Tyranid player doing things, I guess I'll put it in quotes, the proper way, and this Tyranid player most certainly included, will field enough of those to cover his whole army, and he certainly did here. Everything I shot at was -1 to be hit. The Carnify who were up front had the piece of upgrade that did it, and everybody else had, or just was in range of either the Venomthrope or the Malanthrope, which produced the -1 to be hit. I know it's not technically true, it's not literally true, because they don't have an army selection for it in the front of the book, like Kronos or Kraken or General Mungar or whatever, but you can essentially very easily run a Tyranid list that is all -1 to be hit across the board. And when you're playing Grey Knights who specialize in quality over quantity, having your whole army all of a sudden hit on 4s with your shooting is not great. It sucks quite a bit. There's not a strong counter to that. I don't think Grey Knights have anything that improve their hit rolls by 1. The Grandmaster will let you reroll once to hit. That's about it. Even Caldor Drago wouldn't help you here because your 3s would still qualify as misses, so all you would do is reroll 1s and 2s. Because the -1 applies after any rerolls are done. So you're pretty much screwed when you have to deal with something like that. So about remembering your rules. It's very important to remember all of your rules because most of them are game-changing. You have units. Units themselves have unit special rules. You have army-wide special rules that come naturally that you can't turn off. Let's use Space Marines as an easy example. We'll use Grey Knights because it's the example that matters here. We'll use Grey Knights. Grey Knights have Demon Hunter that they can't turn off. It's just part of the army. And they shall know no fear. Same way. They have Rites of Banishment. And I believe that is it for the core 3 special rules that they can't turn off. Demon Hunter only works against demons. I'm playing against a Tyranid player. That one's easy to forget because it's not going to do anything. And They Shall Know No Fear allows Grey Knights and all Space Marine players to reroll failed morale checks. I don't usually forget that one. It's hard to when you play Space Marines. Rites of Banishment. You can't forget that one when you're playing Grey Knights because if you forget Rites of Banishment, all of a sudden Grey Knights become the most overpowered army in all of 40k because Rites of Banishment is the thing that holds them back. Holds them back considerably. It's the thing that neuters their smite. So you can't forget that one. You'll be called out on it instantly for cheating. Then you have units. Units have their own specific special rules. Let's say a strike team. A strike team has a special rule called Teleport Strike. When you play Grey Knights, a lot of units have Teleport Strike, but not everyone does. So it is a unit special rule. A strike team has Teleport Strike. If you're playing a chaplain has a special rule called Litanies of Hate. It's on his unit profile. It's not on the army, it's on the unit profile. Typically, when you play almost any codex in 8th edition, Grey Knights are an exception, so we'll go back to regular Space Marines for a bit. You have a selection for an army-wide special rule at the beginning of the game when you're generating your list. If you're playing Space Marines, you could choose to be Black Templar, you could choose to be White Scars, you could choose to be Salamanders. And that gives you a special rule that applies to most of your army. If you're playing Space Marines, it applies to just your infantry, bikes, and dreadnoughts. I believe all of the Xenos, with the exception of Gene City Cult, it applies to the army-wide. And I don't know Chaos, if Chaos has. I think Chaos Space Marines are just infantry, bikes, and dreadnoughts, and I think Chaos Demons is army-wide, but I don't know. I don't play demons, and I haven't got to fight a demon player for a long time, which is a positive thing. But that's besides the point. So you get that special rule you have to remember as well. Then you start going into things like optional relics, optional pieces of war gear, warlord traits, psychic spell bonuses, psychic spell negatives. And this starts getting into a thing of general game friendliness. If you have a negative that was inflicted upon your squad by by the enemy, by the other player, more often than not, they'll remember to tell you, because they put a negative on you. They want that status effect to be in place. However, if you end up putting a buff on your own guys and you forget to use it, sometimes your opponent won't remind you, and it's not always because they're intentionally not reminding you. If you forgot it, they want you to suffer for it because it hurts them that you have it. That's not usually the case. Not here. I only play with people that aren't horrible monsters like that. But they don't think about it because it's not their initial concern. It is their concern that you got a negative put on you because they wanted that. That's a succeeding thing. They're not thinking about the bonus you put on your guys. And that's actually exactly what happened in this game. I had been struggling to fight off my opponent's 3 Carnify that he had. Was it 3? Nope, I'm sorry, it was 4. My opponent had 4 Carnify. I was struggling to put down the 4 Carnify that he had. It was 3 regular Carnify and Old One Eye. I ended up putting one of them down, and I put Old One Eye down before I conceded. I did concede this game, and we're getting to the reason why. I had a 3-man squad of Terminators that had been fighting off Carnify and a Broodlord for quite some time. It was a several turn long combat of just people going in and trying to fight, and I ended up fighting one of the Carnify that was not wounded, and I slapped it with my Demon Hammer, got 2 wounds through, and he failed both, and it took 6 wounds. Carnify has 8 wounds, so it only had 2 wounds left. I then had a Halberd and a Falchion, who both took wounds at it and did not manage to hurt it from that point forward. And I had forgot that I put Hammerhand on that unit. Hammerhand is a spell that allows you to add 1 to your wound rolls, meaning I wound the Carnify on 4s instead of 5s. That would have made all the difference. 1 more wound would have gone through. With force weapons, the average damage is 2, and only 1 more wound is all on average it would have taken for that Carnify to drop, which would have freed my unit from combat. The Carnify swung at them and killed them afterwards. That wouldn't have happened because the Carnify would be dead before he got his opportunity to swing, and my Apothecary nearby could have started resurrecting dead Terminators because it was only a 3-man squad, and I could have changed the tide of the battle in a much more significant way than I did. I moved on to the next turn, and after I did that, after I realized what I had done, I conceded because I was so frustrated with myself that I had started to bounce back. Grey Knights are always at a disadvantage because the Grey Knight Codex is just bad. The game started off definitely in his favor, but I was starting to fight him off, starting to do pretty well, and to forget that and just completely drop my tempo for entirely my own fault was just too frustrating for me to continue playing, and that's happened to me before, and it'll probably happen to me again. One of the little things we like to say here in our local game store is typically if you forget something, it doesn't matter. It's usually true. We say that for a reason. Let's say you forgot, I had another gun, like I forgot to fire my pistol or something. 99% of the time, if you were to fire that pistol, because we'll let you go back and do it, you would either fail to hit, fail to wound, or it would be armor saved off, and nothing changed, which is why we say it didn't matter. 99% of the time, that is the case. This is an instance where it actually would have mattered. I couldn't remember what my dice rolls were, so we couldn't just go back. We didn't want to just redo it. That wasn't fair to him, and it really was one of those things where it could have changed the tide of battle. Absolutely it could have. The thing about Grey Knights is Grey Knights are a balanced codex in a pocket dimension somewhere where their quality versus quantity thing never turns off. Grey Knights are excellent at shooting, they are excellent at close combat, and they are excellent at psychic, but they don't have a safety net to fail at any one of those things. If you have a 10-man Terminator squad as Grey Knights, and let's say they have a bad shooting, they flub, they roll a bunch of 1s and 2s, you've lost. You might as well, like, if you're only concerned about winning, just scoop. You've lost the game as Grey Knights. Other armies have more things on the table that can try to pick up the slack. You can afford failures. Grey Knights are so expensive they can't afford failures. And to have my Hammerhand successfully cast on a unit in close combat with a monstrous creature and then forget to use it is a blunder that cost the game. And I couldn't keep playing after that. So I just conceded to my opponent. So remember your rules, kids. Remember the war gear that you brought. Remember the special special rules on the war gear that you have, whether you bought it or not. Remember the relics that you have. Remember the warlord traits. Remember your auras. Remember the psychic spells that you have and the psychic spells that you've cast. Remember army-wide special rules you start off with before the game begins, either just on you normally, or the ones that you get to pick if you're any other codex except like Grey Knights. Remember that stuff because it's very important, and there's a lot to remember, but you have to remember it. Remember your stratagems. That's a hard one. Remember your stratagems. There's a lot. My tip for stratagems, I don't usually have the problem with stratagems anymore because I figured out a way to do it. At the beginning of the game, I always have my stratagem deck of cards for any army that I play. Go through your stratagem deck and pull out all of the cards that are impossible to use, and then pull out the ones that only matter at the start of the game, like the ones that give you extra relics. Pull out all the ones that you can't use, and then separate all the cards that you can use into any turn, like generalist, like reroll a single die, can be used at any point. Separate those, movement phase, psychic phase, charging phase, movement phase, psychic phase, shooting phase, charging phase, fighting phase, and morale phase. Separate them like that, and then go through the deck, the little stack of cards that you've now built. It's going to be 2 or 3 per stack normally. At the beginning of every phase, to go through and plan out what you want to use. So I don't have a problem with stratagems, but they're also something that's very important to remember. Remember your rules, because they are very, very important. And it's really frustrating when you forget your own rules, especially when you forget it several turns later and it's too late to go back, or if it was a die roll that you can't remember and it's too late to go back. And Tyranids are kind of overpowered. Those are the lessons for today. Remember your rules, and Tyranids are kind of overpowered. Thanks for listening.